Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Edens, and I would like to welcome all of you to this month's First Wednesdays talk with our guest, Jessamine West. Jessamine is one of our board members and is also here to share some information with us about libraries in the time of COVID. So this is incredibly relevant. I'm so excited. I'm so happy that you all are here with us. Again, my name is Rachel Edens, and I'm the program officer at Vermont Humanities. And this evening, I would just like to, before we get started, take a moment to thank our underwriters. Our series underwriters are the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And so, as always, we are so appreciative for their generous support. So I would like to share a little bit about Jessamine and then hand it over to her. Jessamine West is a library technologist from Randolph, Vermont. She's a nationally known speaker, writer, and educator on the issues facing today's libraries. Her blog, focusing on libraries and politics, librarian.net, is one of the earliest and longest running librarian websites. She writes a column for Computers and Libraries magazine and is the author of the book Without a Net, Librarians Bridging the Digital Divide. She's taught tools for community advocacy for the University of Hawaii Library School and was on the advisory board to the Wikipedia Foundation. As a librarian without a library for the past 15 years, she has spent most of her time working with her local community as a hands-on technology educator. We have definitely benefited from having Jessamine with us here in the state, and I'm delighted to have her on today. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over. Thank you so much, Jessamine.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I am very excited about getting to talk to you all about what public libraries have been doing over the past year or so. Basically, I have some slides, I have some facts, I have some trivia, and they are all also on a webpage. My web host is having a little bit of trouble today, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to load that or not, but pardon me. The web address is on the bottom of these slides. It's librarian.net/talks/COVID, and that will show you a page of links, because there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to be talking about where you might think, oh, well, that's a thing I would actually like to know some more about. And there are links you can follow, especially links to all of the libraries and the State Department of Libraries, as well as the Vermont Library Association, who are all doing really interesting and pretty noteworthy stuff. So I will, you can also follow along with my slides on that page if for whatever reason this presentation doesn't work for you or you want to see them at a later time. So basically this is going to be talking about the last year of what's been going on in public libraries in Vermont, and how sort of it's become a thing that creative problem solving has really basically helped us serve our communities. So thanks very much for showing up today. And I look forward to talking to you more about this. So basically, started as a library trivia person, I just want to tell you some things that we know about Vermont's public libraries before this all started. Vermont has 183, 184-ish libraries. There's some small seasonal libraries and a couple that sort of, go in and out of existence in various ways. And that's more than any other state in the country, which is pretty nifty, actually. 4 of those libraries are Carnegie libraries: Burlington, Fairhaven, Morrisville, Rockingham. Really cool buildings. There's also a Carnegie building at Norwich University, but it is no longer a Carnegie library. The average Vermonter pays $33 a year to get access to their local public library, and Vermont is one of 8 states, so not that many, that doesn't get direct funding from the state, meaning that there isn't a line item in the state budget that funds individual public libraries. The Department of Libraries, VT Lib, gets money from the state, and that does benefit local libraries in terms of support, summer reading programs, consultants, help in a number of different ways, some of which I'll talk about, but there isn't direct legislative funding. And so it's pretty amazing they can do what they do. And one of the things that even before COVID was happening, libraries were helping their communities get access to computers. There's 1,000 public access computers at public libraries in Vermont. It's one of the only places you can get free access to not just Wi-Fi or internet, but internet plus a computer, plus a person that can help you use it. And this is very important. So average of 6 computers per library, and this big number, 417,408 public computing sessions. And that comes straight from the Department of Libraries, Public Library Statistics. That's actually from calendar year 2019. And they assemble these statistics every year, which helps libraries sort of understand what other libraries are doing and how they're faring. And this is my only like super wordy slide, but basically there's a lot of things that go into the library ecosystem. I've mentioned a couple of them. There's the Department of Libraries, which is otherwise kind of colloquially known as the state library, though technically it's its own thing in a really curious way. There's the Vermont Library Association, which is a professional association for librarians in the state of Vermont. Every state has one. And then there's the American Library Association at a national level. Also at the national level, we have IMLS, which Rachel already mentioned, Institute for Museum and Library Services. They do a lot of big grants to like state libraries, but they also do smaller grants to libraries that do projects or regional grants. In this case, one of them is OCLC, which is a nonprofit library organization in Ohio, and they did the Realm project, which I'll be talking about very briefly. So at a state level, we've got Department of Libraries, Vermont Library Association. There's also some professional associations like VISLA, Vermont School Library Association, and VCAL, Vermont College and Academic Librarians, which support librarians in those specific areas. And that gives us networking opportunities, advocacy, and a whole bunch of other things. And then going down to a local level, each library is, because of the way funding works in the state, individually funded and so answerable to their local communities even more than maybe public libraries are in other states. And so all of that goes together to form sort of the library ecosystem. When you're going into a public library in Vermont, you're benefiting from all of these different levels of sort of library opportunity. And it really does feel in a really major way, speaking for myself at least, that during this last year, all of the library people were and are all in this together. So IMLS, which I talked about, they basically got CARES Act money from the federal government, and they did CARES Act grants. This is a screenshot from a video where they talk about that program. If you're interested in that, you can watch this video. I mostly took this screenshot because the guy, I don't know what he's doing to that stuffed bear, but that picture makes me laugh. But it's basically a grant program to support museums and libraries responding. In many cases, these grants would help libraries build out their internet, build out contactless ways to interact with their community, and help state libraries and other associations to support their communities. So this was some top-down funding for museums and libraries. And one of the big projects was this Realm project. Realm stands for Reopening Archives, Libraries, and Museums. Very optimistic note that we're not quite at yet. But basically, you can see from the date on this slide, this was the 22nd of June, so pretty early in sort of the COVID year. And this program essentially used or did science to determine how long the coronavirus could live on items that were commonly circulated in libraries. So this is one slide from the first test. They've been doing more and more of these tests every couple months with different items, different arrangements of items. And so in this case, it was, you know, how long can COVID live on a book? What if it's a soft cover book? What if it's a page inside a book? And this was incredibly helpful because early on in the pandemic, we didn't really know how safe it was to touch surfaces or how long a surface could potentially have the virus on it. And so this information helped inform libraries determining how long to hold a book, to quarantine a book before it went back into circulation. You know, was it different for a DVD? Was it different for a plastic book? And early on, it provided sort of some leadership and some guidance for libraries who were really trying to do a whole bunch of stuff kind of brand new. And so the Department of Libraries has been doing this great thing, which is collecting weekly statistics from public libraries, asking them what services they have been offering. If you want to see exactly the questions they're asking, there's a link to the survey on my list of links page. But basically asking, you know, are you open? Are you not open? What are you offering? What are you doing? What restrictions do you have in place? And that not only sort of helps libraries think about what their options are, but looking at the results can help libraries ascertain what's, I mean, obviously every way of responding to this is normal, but figuring out what's normative, right? What are the things that most libraries are doing? So right now, for example, this was, I believe, last week, 26% of the state's libraries, give or take, because not every library responds to this survey, 26% are open to the public, meaning just doors open, you can walk in. 1% are fully closed, meaning they're not being staffed right now. 57% are open, but staff only. And so this can include libraries that are doing curbside, libraries that are doing phone reference, libraries that are doing a bunch of different stuff. And then 16% are open only by appointment. The bulk of those libraries that are open in some way are doing some kind of virtual programming. And we'll look at some examples of that later on in this talk. 23% do something in person. We'll see what some of those things are. And that can include stuff that's outdoors. It can also include stuff that's asynchronous. 96% of open libraries, so basically everyone, is doing what's in the library parlance called curbside pickup. But realistically, in a lot of our communities, we don't really have curbs. So, you know, at the door service or whatever your way of thinking about this is. In bigger locations, and I'm not sure if they're doing this in Burlington or not, to be honest, but like in big cities in other states, you know, you drive your car into a pickup space and you kind of pop your trunk and somebody can come out and put your books in the car. Here, more often, it's, a book truck that's got a little bag. Well, we'll talk about that when that comes up. But curbside and basically every library that is open at all is offering some kind of wireless access outside the building. Obviously, this is a bigger deal when the weather is slightly warmer. Oh, by all accounts, it is gorgeous in Vermont today. But it does mean you can park outside the library in your car and have access to the internet. Because one of the things that has been super difficult is people who don't have good internet access at home that have suddenly found that like shopping, school, social interactions, and everything else is suddenly an internet problem as opposed to just a time or money or whatever problem. And as somebody who spent some time doing, before COVID, sort of an in-person drop-in time at the Kimball Library, hang out in a room, people come ask computer questions. That's cool. And now I do a lot of that either over Zoom or over email or sometimes via text, honestly. It's surprising that people's computer problems, which were usually like, email, Facebook, trying to figure out a thing, is now like everything because so much of sort of people's day-to-day activities are computer mediated or internet mediated. So, and they also made charts. If you've been sort of keeping up with COVID in Vermont, because I sort of do close reads of this, you can really kind of see how there was a whole bunch that were open until hockey and Halloween happened. And then Vermont's COVID numbers, which had been great, became slightly less great. And then a whole bunch of libraries have closed, at least closed to the public, and are just starting to reopen. If you want to see more of these charts, they're available on the Department of Libraries, VT Lib's website, and they're linked on my page of links. And a couple more statistics. And one of the things I think is so helpful about this is it really lets libraries see what other libraries are doing. And some of these stats, I'm just so proud of libraries, right? 89% of libraries that filled out this survey have not laid off or furloughed any staff, which is huge and definitely not something that other states can say about the same time period. Of the libraries that are closed to the public, most of them still offer services that they would have had to have done in person, such as printing, faxing, scanning. And I got to tell you the truth, like in the past, I have a printer, but I don't have a color printer. And my library's right up the road. And so in the past, if I wanted to print something, I would wander over there with a USB drive, but I would have to take up a public access computer in order to print a thing. Now I can just email a PDF to the librarian who can put it in a folder that waits for me curbside. And I got to be honest, it's easier and it takes up fewer resources. And one of the things that I'm really curious about in the upcoming months and or year is how many of these curbside style services libraries are going to stick with because they actually make sense in a way that nobody would have considered until they were kind of forced to. And 79% of libraries offer masks for patron use. I think it's worth remembering that before the current administration, there wasn't really a mask mandate. I mean, Governor Scott definitely said, it's a good idea, but there weren't, I guess there still aren't kind of rules in place, but at any rate, there was not a top-down mask mandate that people thought were serious. And so in certain communities, mask wearing was a thing that was super normal, and in other communities, maybe a little less so. And so for libraries where, it's an interior space, you're trying to figure out how to make it safe, not just for other patrons, but for your staff who have to be in there, significantly more, libraries would offer masks for patron use, some of which, if I remember correctly, they were able to get from the state. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And this connectivity thing was huge. Vermont's Department of Public Service partnered with State Department of Libraries and a whole bunch of other organizations to gather data on where the free municipal Wi-Fi access points were in the state. And what we were finding is Wi-Fi was extended. In many cases, libraries extended the reach of their Wi-Fi to go further outside of the building. It was on for more hours. More libraries have their Wi-Fi on 24/7 than used to. They created this map, which is actually, it doesn't look great on the screen, but it's a cool interactive map so you can see where the municipal Wi-Fi is. Now, this won't include Wi-Fi at places like McDonald's or other places, Dunkin' Donuts, where you can, park outside and use it, but it will include, sort of nonprofit libraries, government agencies that are providing them. And the thing that libraries added to this was technology that you could borrow. So this example down at the bottom, Chelsea Public Library, pretty small town in Orange County, they have Chromebooks and they would check you out a Chromebook so that all you had was your phone, or maybe you didn't have a phone. Maybe you needed to do your homework, or maybe you needed to Zoom with your doctor, or who knows what the thing was. You could not just access the internet, but you could get a tool to access the internet too. So 165 libraries, and to be honest, probably more, are access points for their communities. And I showed this to a friend of mine in a different state, and he's like, what's going on up in the corner? Because obviously there's really not a lot of dots up there, but it is also worth remembering that there's just not as many people up in the Northeast Kingdom, although to be fair, libraries are fewer and farther between up in the Northeast Kingdom than in any other part of the state, which is definitely a question with no obvious answer. But you can see like the teeny dots right up on the border, which is Canaan and Guilford and a couple other libraries that are really doing some great stuff. So, and in terms of staying connected, our professional associations and the state library did a lot of work here. Both the state and the Vermont Library Association sponsor regular online meetups. both for continuing ed, updates, everything else. The state library recently did a town meeting legislative update. VLA does a monthly kind of get together and sort of a first Thursdays, which kind of has a familiar ring to it, doesn't it? And the first Thursdays, alternative ones are about library resources and planning. And then the alternative ones are all this year have been on anti-racism topics, which is super helpful when you're trying to figure out how to deal with not only a global pandemic, but how to be effectively anti-racist and usefully interact with communities in ways that are appropriate to the times that we're living in. And the Department of Libraries sends out twice weekly resource updates, which are long emails full of links. And the state librarian, I say extraordinaire because that's in his signature file, sends us all the Department of Health updates, which means we can stay up to date with what's going on with the Department of Health, in addition to staying up to date with what's going on in our communities. And this is just a screenshot from my inbox, my library inbox, showing all the different stuff that we are up to. And the Vermont Library Association specifically sent a letter to Governor Scott after vaccinations had started, but while they were still kind of figuring stuff out about who would go in what order, et cetera, just advocating in partnership with VISLA, Vermont School Library Association, to prioritize library workers along with other frontline workers. Obviously, this is kind of a touchy issue because you don't want to jump the queue. And in the state, I feel like the vaccine rollout has been reasonable, but it did seem worth pointing out, hey, if you're going to put teachers up front there, and that has only recently happened, this was written before that happened, you should probably include librarians in that group too. So this is the kind of thing the Vermont Library Association does, and just to, you know, further the health and safety of librarians, and then as a result, the people who are using those libraries. And so a couple other general activities that are happening. This is maybe my favorite early COVID thing. This is a YouTube video from the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum that was just like, hey, things have changed a little bit at the library. So let's talk a little bit about how to, you know, use hand sanitizer, stay safe, give each other space, wear masks. But the, you know, the black and white nature of this and the old timey version of, you know, the old timey look of the Athenaeum, a gorgeous library, if you have not been there, does make it look a little bit like, is this from the 1930s? And then, no, of course it is from March. But personal protective equipment, including barriers, disinfectant wipes, and hand sanitizer, were made available at the state level and given to libraries. And it's a little hard to remember now, but it was hard to find some of these things at the beginning of COVID. And it was very nerve-wracking wanting to know if you were going to have enough hand sanitizer or disinfectant to keep your library clean and safe. And the state really stepped up and made this available. And a lot of libraries, including the Athenaeum, found friendly, cheery ways to introduce patrons to the new procedures. And, you know, we can't all be the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum, but they also had these amazing face masks that include this painting, The Domes of Yosemite, which was done by Albert Bierstadt and also hangs inside the library. So if you wanted to, and you've always been a fan of this particular piece of art, you can wear your mask of the art in front of the art as you tootle around the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. A couple other things that all libraries did for the most part: curbside of some kind. I talked about this before, you know, having a little book cart full of books with people's names written on them. And it is important to note that, you know, the paper bag or plastic bag aspect of this is because of libraries' privacy policies, right? We won't tell people what you're reading. And this also includes the hold shelf. So, you know, you might know that somebody's got a bigger box or a bigger bag than somebody else, but you're not going to be able to figure out what somebody's reading, even during COVID, by riffling through what's on the hold shelf or what's on the at the door service. So that's why these all look like it's some sort of weird takeout brown bag lunch. And curbside really happened all the way through all seasons. And you'll note, I note just sort of underneath these pictures, you know, Bixby's and Virgin's has it in the vestibule for autumn. Rochester had it underneath their awning on their front porch, contactless pickup while the library was open. Waterbury moved their cart outside for the summertime. And then in the lower corner, that's actually a picture of some books that I picked up from my local library. And it includes a pound of maple candy, because if your librarian happens to be married to the local sugar maker, it's really a great way to get your candy while you get your books. And some libraries went in different directions and had different ideas of how to do different kinds of things. Many libraries early on felt like they were staffed and sort of technologically able to do virtual programming. And this is tricky, right? Because you haven't done it before. Not only might you not know how to do it, but your community might not know how to do it, right? You can't jump to Zoom programming if people don't already know how to get on Zoom. So it was tricky, especially for more digitally divided communities, but a lot of libraries found interesting and novel ways to sort of deal with this. So Greensboro Public Library, as an example, so almost sort of up north, basically did a Zoom Zentangle workshop. I don't know if you know what Zentangles are. I learned about them actually putting together this talk. Little squares where you use dots and kind of a sort of a patterned idea to draw these almost mandala-like meditative patterns. And it's a thing a guy came up with, and they basically did a workshop with somebody who was zooming in from Ohio, but all of these people in the picture are, you know, local Vermonters, I believe, for the most part, and they co-sponsored it with another library, Cabot Public Library, so that they could combine, you know, they could each chip in a little less money, but combine their populations and do a program that would work for all of them. This is a thing that is actually, assuming technological competence, is actually easier in COVID than sort of before. This may be, it's hard, right? I don't want to have favorites, but this may be one of my favorites. The Windsor Public Library, Windsor, Vermont, did a virtual dog show in combination with Windsor on Air. Basically, people would send in videos of themselves. This is a kid playing harmonica while his dog sings. And the virtual dog show would come in, and then you'd have the judges down the side, and they did, I believe, a live, possibly a recorded. It's recorded now, so go check it out on Vimeo. Broadcast where they evaluated each entrant in each category and chose the winners. Completely adorable. I loved it. Manchester, Vermont, a library that it's hard to sort of explain, but some libraries are, you know, bigger, better funded. Other libraries, smaller, less funded. Funding doesn't always make a difference, but Manchester had a really nice sort of graphic design aspect to a program that they did called Crafternoon, where basically there would be a story and then a craft that you could do, all of which were, the craft would be take home, the story would be sort of live from the library, and they were doing different ones every week, and they were adorable. This one was reading a book and making these carp kites, which is what's in the picture. I did a presentation for the Rochester Public Library, and this was just recently in February, talking to people in the community who maybe weren't online that much or didn't know what you could find online at much. And it was kind of a tour of like, well, what are some things going on outside that you might be interested in? Or what are some things going on online that you might be interested in? And how could you find some? And let's talk about it. And, you know, I did it virtually from my house in Randolph. We had some people from Rochester showing up, and I also advertised it on Front Porch Forum. So local people from my Randolph community showed up, and we had a really good time. And then, you know, I kind of started thinking, right? Well, if I can go to programs, or people can go to programs in the next town, like what's going on in other states? So like I'm from, you know, central or suburban Massachusetts. And so I started paying attention to things that other locations were putting on. And, in Acton, Massachusetts, the Acton Historical Society, I grew up one town over, did this program about the ice trade, you know, which was a big deal, way that people made money in very early historical New England. And one of the old timers in Acton, who can remember some of the last ice houses and ice procurers, you know, people who worked in ice in Acton, did this online talk, and it was super fun, and it was actually kind of a great thing to be able to do. And to be honest, we're finding that with Vermont, the Humanities Council's First Wednesdays program, right? That, you know, First Wednesdays are a wonderful way for people to get together in person and listen to a speaker and share kind of an in-person experience. One of the last things I actually did before COVID was I gave a talk all the way up in Newport about Vermont's libraries. It was a really good time. It was great to get to hang out with people. But now I can actually look at what Vermont Humanities is doing statewide and don't have to think about whether I need to get in my car and kind of drive an hour or two over various mountain ranges in order to be able to experience it, which has actually been kind of nifty, and a lot of them are also being recorded on websites. So I found this on the website of the Acton Historical Society. Vermont Humanities has a whole bunch of past programs available online as well. And so then there was outdoor programming. And to be honest, some of this is year-round. You may be surprised that your public library may loan things like snowshoes or telescopes that you can take home and use. But in some cases, they actually did programming. And programming is kind of like a library word, but it just basically means putting on events, right? Public programming. So different outdoor programs include Norwich did this project with the Norwich Historical Society, which was called the Circles Project, where basically you would paint a circle of something that was helping you get through your time, your COVID time. And so they had distanced places where people could paint or otherwise craft out in the parking lot. And then Windsor Public Library did this mushroom foraging hike together. I don't know if you know Paradise Park in Windsor, but they had a mushroom guy and a whole bunch of people, and they did a masked walk outside where they looked at the different kinds of mushrooms that you could forage in the park there. And which was such a huge that it actually wound up on the cover of the town report. And I just love this picture because it clearly shows so many different hands talking about what helped them this year. And so it's not just the act of making the thing that becomes part of the sort of community building, but it's the act of showing the thing back to people. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, and one of the things that was always really neat was when like you or your parents would show up in the town report, right? Like maybe you were on like a soccer team that won, or your mom was on a committee or something, and you were like, hey, that's us. And so I can only imagine being able to look at the cover of your town report and being like, hey, that's my soccer ball. Hey, that's my little heart, or whatever the thing is. And then there was some more traditional programming, including Stowe Public Library just did their story time on the lawn, and everybody got a blanket that was kind of spaced out from everybody else, and the librarian talked slightly louder than she had to, but it meant that families could see other families and maybe have a chance for interaction in a time that was really not full of chances for interactions. Barnett did a whole thing where they basically closed their building to the public, but while the library was open, you know, the times that the library was open, they did library on the lawn, right? It's always kind of cool. You get like a hip name and it suddenly seems like you're not just settling, but you're creating a whole new thing. They would put tables, they had books out with them. You could browse the books, you could grab a book and sit on one of the socially distanced picnic tables or benches. And they also had a story walk, which was another thing that we saw repeated over and over and over again, that libraries would take pages from books, they would laminate them or put them in, plastic folders or whatever, and they'd hang them up somewhere either on the property or in the community so that people could, with their children, usually, because, in many cases, just figuring out a new thing to do with your kids, right? Especially if your kids are stuck in a situation where they're like on Zoom for school, so they don't get to like get out, get a lot of exercise, etc. Having these story walks available and being like a new thing or a thing that's changed while so much of the world appears samey and or just not great was a really nice thing. So like other libraries did story walks, including Waterbury, and did this one in their backyard. You can kind of see like variants on a theme, right? My library did a like almost a scavenger hunt walk where you could walk around a designated path in our sort of downtown village area and find pairs of letters. And then you combine those pairs of letters and they would spell a word. Just, I don't know, kind of a neat thing and a way for the library to still be the library, but be the library in a way that was safe and community building. And so then there was just distanced programming, right? Peachum had this very sort of adorable little container of pool noodles outside of their library. And you can't really see this in the picture, but there's a little sign on it that says, these are about 6 feet long. Use these to tell how far away you need to be from people. Actual radius measurement will vary with arm length, not recommended for T-Rex, right? Dinosaur joke. Hilarious. And so people could use those if they were specifically concerned about maintaining distance from other people. And here's a local Peachum resident going on a pig parade story walk out behind the library. And Peachum actually kept up with their story walks. I don't know if you can really see, but this is just one of those like political signs, possibly repurposed or possibly purpose built for this, that's in their backyard, even during the wintertime, right? Because one of the things in the winter is Vermonters need to get outside. Vermonters are gonna get outside. So they did this really nice story walk out behind the library. Couple other things that libraries did that were very similar. Charlotte Library had a bunch of takeout crafts that were available in the vestibule. They also have kits that you can check out that are a little bit more in-depth, like a book and a project or a thing. And I put a link in my list of links to some of the kits that they have available, which is like a whole little take-home thing, like binoculars and a bird book and some color-in pages for books, for birds, help you kind of have a new thing to do at home. So takeout crafts. Norwich had a bunch of craft to go bags, just like pick one up, walk outside of the library. And then Judevine Hardwick, or the Judevine Library in Hardwick, did this great take home story time where you had a craft to do. You could take it home with a book. They'd even send you home with some crayons, because who knows what the crayon situation is at anybody's house. And they promoted this stuff through their Instagram. There's not a ton of Vermont libraries that are like really proactively using Instagram. But if you look at the Judevine Library's Instagram, you can kind of get a sense of how they kept up with communicating. And communication is sort of a theme through this whole thing. One of the things I didn't really have a picture of, but was an anecdote that I liked, is Georgia Public Library did a thing at the very beginning of COVID where they kind of ran the numbers on their catalog and they figured out who their kind of frequent flyers were among their patrons. And I think in some communities, people will assume like, oh, that's our older retired patrons. And they found it wasn't always, but often. Figured out who was, who had the library on their regular rotation, who would be missing the library when the library was closed. And they just, while they were inside at a staff-only library, just made some phone calls. Talk to the people on the phone about kind of the library was closed, but did you know, that maybe you have Hoopla so you can watch videos from home, or Libby, the app that lets you read books from Overdrive, or, other interactive ways to still get and receive services from the library that maybe you didn't know if you'd just been attending the library in person. And so Georgia just sort of decided to proactively give people calls from their community. And it's really another interesting side thing about this anecdote is I mentioned this like on Twitter, I don't know, last year at some point, and there was a huge split down the middle of both librarians and patrons who were like, I better not get a phone call from my library for no reason. And people who were like, oh, that's sweet. Like that would be a neat thing to do for my community. And I don't know if it's a rural urban thing or a private, less private thing or whatever the thing was, but it, you know, it was good conversation about what people's expectations of their library in these times are, and gave me kind of an interesting way of thinking about the whole thing. And a couple more examples, then I'll wrap it up here. But Williamstown, the Ainsworth Library in Williamstown did a weekly book bingo where they would have a bingo card and you could color in the squares that were things that you could find in your house. This one is about parts of a book. So, you know, decal edge, for example, or staple binding, or an elephant folio, or a gilt edge. Different things you could learn about parts of books, and then you could send in your completed bingo cards, and you know, people would win various prizes. So each week in the winter there was a different book topic. One was all awards, or one was book characters, and then the library would give you prizes at the end of it. And then one that didn't really fit into any category but I really loved is the Lincoln Public Library has display cases in, I believe, by appointment now. I'm not 100% sure. And they have the display cases that are filled with stuff to look at from local sugaring operations, because sugaring is one of the things that kind of is socially distanced most of the time, although I believe Governor Scott told us to not spend too much time in the sugar shed breathing on each other. But a lot of the other work, going out in the woods, collecting, keeping the fires running, are things that you can do sort of while distanced. And, you know, the open houses were the only thing that was really canceled, the Lincoln Library points out. And, you know, at the end, they kind of wrap it up and say, this has been one of the defining characteristics of the pandemic is the inequalities. And last but not least, we found that the stuff that the libraries did and the way they included other groups, other people, other activities, other spaces were really instrumental and useful in helping people remain connected to their communities. So Kimball Library, our children's and YA librarian, Courtney, got her master's degree during this whole thing. And so there was a big car parade that we did by the library, and everybody honked and waved like a nut, and they made a big sign. And it was just really as nice as you could be during this really difficult time. And Norwich, both for the high school graduation and for the 6th grade graduation, had all the librarians out on the lawn holding signs as, I believe, the high schoolers like drove around, or the parents of the 6th graders drove around, and they could see that their community supported them. My last sort of specific example is from the Bixby Library. This year was going to be their 3rd annual Lego competition, but you can't really do a Lego competition in person during COVID. And so they had to kind of retool. They took all of their creations to the Boys and Girls Club, and then judging would happen in the morning. And then all the families that had participated, or if you just wanted to see the Legos, signed up for 10-minute slots to kind of walk around the Boys and Girls Club and look at what everybody made, admire the winners. This is one of the winners here in this picture. And so last year, just pre-pandemic, they had 60 entries. And this year they wound up with 45 from pre-K through high school, right in the middle of the pandemic, which was actually really cool. And Catherine Hayes, who's the director of the library, said this in an email to me when I was reaching out to talk to people about this, talking about that it really exemplified the best parts of what has happened in the pandemic. There's been more cooperation and collaboration. We've had to be more creative in solving the problems we've had with programming, and people are committed to offering the community a sense of fun and purpose across generations, which I really think is a great summary of what libraries have been able to do during this time. And, you know, one of the other things is being the library means that other people can help you help the community. So Peacham's got a big bulletin board outside the library where there's all sorts of what's going on and what you need to know and general sort of public notes. And this is a little, there's cards and envelopes and bookmarks and this little sign with the text next to it that says, here are some cards that Jenny Roy made. Please take some and send them to people who are stuck at home due to this difficult time. I thought these cards would cheer people up. Also, take a bookmark and enjoy. So thanks very much. This was one of the hearts that Charlotte Library put outside of their library for the, you know, Light Up Vermont thing that Phil Scott did. Again, my slides can be seen when my web host is working at librarian.net/talks/COVID. And please feel free to stay in touch. I'm jessamyn@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Jessamyn, and I'm here to answer questions if people have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessamyn. We have a question here from Jennifer. For libraries who have set up tech loaning, like Chelsea, how does that work?
Well, in general, what it means is the technology item, and we do it at Kimball Library, so I can speak more to kind of how our situation works. We lend laptops, same thing, different kind of laptop. Usually it means the laptop is in the online catalog and you can find it just like any other item, although it's worth talking to your library to see what they have. The item is usually checked out not just as the item, but kind of in a whole kit with like its charger, the passwords you would need in order to log on to it. Our laptops have a trackpad on them, but they also come with a mouse because not everybody's great with the trackpad. And often the librarians can recommend a book if you've really never used one before and you need a little bit of help figuring it out. And then usually they lend for, you know, normal lending amounts of time, couple weeks. I think some libraries are really lending them out for like semesters, but that's really just determined by the library. And then you get them. Some libraries require some kind of, you got to sign a thing being like, I realize this is kind of an expensive piece of technology. Some don't. And then you just get the thing at home. Some libraries will lend not only a laptop, but a laptop and like what we call a mobile hotspot. It's kind of like a cell phone, except it's not a phone. It can access a cellular signal, so it gives you internet access in that place. Other ones, it's just presumed you can use your own internet or another sort of internet situation. And then once you return them to the library, and this is sometimes tricky because the libraries really don't want you to put a laptop in the Dropbox, so you have to find a time when you can drop it off. The librarians like clean it all off so it starts the way it was before. But like, I know we have an iPad and the iPad comes with like the Libby app so that you can check out a book on it. And I believe if you ask, they'll put a book on it for you from your account. So it's very different in different libraries, but what a lot of libraries have, and not all of them, but some of them, and it's one of the things that IMLS grants have really helped with, is stuff like laptops, stuff like ebook readers, stuff like iPads, which can be used as ebook readers, but can also be used as like little mini, mini laptops or internet devices. Sometimes they have like Kobos and other like ebook readers, Kindles, a lot of them have. And so it varies from library to library. And unlike lending books where like interlibrary loan means if our library doesn't have it, you can borrow it from somebody else's library. A lot of the technology does an interlibrary loan. So you couldn't be, in Peacham and interlibrary loan a laptop from Chelsea. But call your library and see what they have, because in many cases, libraries are having technology to lend specifically to help people sort of manage these weird times. Or if they don't, they can often give you advice on how to solve that problem, because they're not the only location that has any, I mean, there's adult basic ed and a whole, other public libraries potentially where you could get this access, but your public library is definitely the best place to start.
Amy comments here, Rockingham Free Public Library is lending Wi-Fi hotspots for 3 weeks and they're solidly booked.
Yeah. There's a lot of libraries that have them. It's awkward because, like, in many cases, if your community doesn't have access to the internet, it's maybe because there isn't any internet access in your community, and a hotspot can't make a cellular tower appear. But really, I've noticed the difference. I've lived in Randolph for 12 years, 13 years, and there's a cell tower in my backyard now, which means I can get cell service everywhere in my apartment, not just next to the window. And I'm sure many other people are having that same experience. So the hotspots that Amy talks about are amazing if there is cellular service, but you don't have, a cell phone or a way to get a connection on a laptop. And one of the things that's really nice about them is it varies, but they can often serve multiple devices. So if you have 2 laptops and you're not doing anything that's too bandwidth intensive, more email and less video, you can share it, which can be super helpful. Because one of the things we found, this is just another weird side note, is, we had a couple families in our community who didn't have access to the internet at home. And this was going to mean the kids were completely up a creek with online learning. And, so we all banded together to try and figure out how to do this. And I mostly kind of followed along at a distance, but, being like, okay, when people get internet, talk to me. I'm the computer lady. I can help you use it. But one of the biggest hurdles wasn't even internet access, right? Like EC Fiber, who's our local fiber provider, would go right by the street. The problem was people lived up a, mile long dirt driveway. And literally the hurdle is digging a trench, right? It's not a technology hurdle. It's not a money hurdle, although a little bit because the trench guy is expensive. But it's literally that kind of logistical combination. It's not just any one thing. It's often a combination of things. And one of my favorite things about the libraries, and Amy from our library at Kimball was on this committee, is they're resourceful. So not only can they tell you about EC Fiber or lend you a laptop, they might just know a guy who can dig a trench, who could use some work, which is really the final piece of that puzzle that can help that family get online.
We have a question here from James Fox. Seems like he works at the Warren Public Library. Maybe James. Wondering, are circulation numbers down? Noted that Warren Public Library physical circulation was down 21% in 2020, but digital circulation was up 14%. Wondering do you have any insight on that?
Well, I don't have the stats handy. I mean, they definitely, James, I would note, is on the Friends of the Acton Public Library. And I believe he and I were both watching that the history of ice farming show. What I have heard, and this is just anecdata because I haven't studied the statistics, is that circulation dipped a little. I mean, similar to what he said, right? Circulation dipped a little, but, every ebook was checked out always, basically, because not everybody, I think, could really click into curbside stuff. It involves being able to use the online catalog. I think there's a lot of people, and I'll be honest, myself included, for whom browsing and like touching the stuff or seeing the cover of the book, right? I'm exceptionally judgmental about what I read. And so I want to look at the cover of the book to figure out if I'm going to like it, or read the thing, if it says like a poignant, I'm like, no, happy stories. And so I think we lost some people who liked browsing, and, as we're open for shorter, like scheduled visits, I think people will be able to get back to that. And it's what they really want, to be honest. But I do think the people who were either already online or were comfortable kind of stepping through the hoops that you need to do to be able to check out digital materials, off to the races, right? And we saw a lot of libraries getting a Zoom account, maybe letting the community use that Zoom account for stuff, right? Because once you're paying, keep that bad boy on like 24 hours a day, right? Like, let people use it, share your wealth. The library is literally only holding on to these resources for the community who bought them, and they belong to the community. And so for people who were able and willing to do that, ebooks shot out the door like crazy. Hoopla was a big thing, and other ways of sort of interacting with digital content, hugely popular. We didn't see circulation dip as much as I had expected it to be perfectly honest. But it may also have to do with like who's counting and how. So hard to tell. I know I've been interlibrary loaning more this year, and I always feel weird about it because I know there's a cost associated with it. So I try to go easy on it. But boy, I have really wanted to read some things that I've been hearing about in these book talks and these other talks. And, I feel like the library, and this may not be fair, is maybe a little less busy. And so I feel a little less bad asking to do something that I feel like is labor intensive like that. So I don't know specifically, but that is the vibe I get of how things are going here too. Hi, James.
And my apology to James for using software that aggregates comments, and I misunderstood. So he is from Massachusetts, not from Warren Public Library. Marie was responding to him from Warren Public Library. I have a question from Howard, and then I'm going to duck out and see if Rachel has any questions, unless other people ask. Howard asks, are there socio-cultural economic aspects to COVID in the impact in Vermont, and are libraries stepping up to help with that?
I mean, of course, right? Like if you're like a jerk like me who lives at home alone and is not trying to balance putting your kids in school and doing your job, it's just a lot easier to do what you're doing. And like I said before, trying to figure out how to get families online who aren't online, who need it so their kids can go to school, dealing with the fact that, if you're an essential worker and you have to figure out what to do with your children on a day when you thought they were going to be doing in-person school and it turns out they are not going to be doing in-person school, those challenges are really complex, right? So in many cases, I believe the school systems are kind of the first line, at least in that regard, dealing with parents, with families and children. And that has been incredibly challenging, though that's not always a socioeconomic issue. I think the real socioeconomic issue we're seeing is the same digital divide issue that we always saw, where you need to file, I got a PPP loan last year, right? Because I haven't been working, frankly, as much as I was. And that was an immense amount of not only paperwork, but like fussing around with like fillable forms and a bank website and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so theoretically, if I had been someone who qualified for this loan, but wasn't really very tech savvy, in the past, I could have gone to the library and somebody would have been there to help me. Nowadays, it's complicated how to get that hands-on help. And, the big deal with the digital divide is it's not just someone who doesn't have a computer, and it's not just someone who doesn't have access to the internet. It's often someone who has multiple challenges in their lives, whatever those challenges are. Maybe it's a money problem. Maybe it's a food insecurity problem. Maybe they got a relationship problem, or they're living with their family and they don't get along with their family, or they got laid off from their job and they can't figure out how to do unemployment, and it's all on the internet, right? In many cases, there's multiple compounding issues, and it's important to understand what all of those issues are. So when somebody comes in and says, I need a computer, you in the library can say, okay, let's, like, what do you need? And obviously, if you don't want to talk about it, that's also fine. But one of the things, like I know Kimball Library did, and, maybe people in the comments or other places can talk about sort of what happened in their libraries, was we really tried to do in-person computer sessions as long as we felt like we possibly could, right? So when the library was essentially closed, we would open it for brief browsing appointments, and computer appointments at the point at which, and at those points, the librarian was also in the library, right? It's not the absolute 100% safest way of providing library services, but it gave more equity to the people who really needed personal assistance, or they needed more time, and it's hard, right? Because anytime you force a community through the online world in order to complete a necessary life task, you're increasing inequality, frankly. And the library kind of did the best it could. I felt like the library community was very mindful that this was a huge problem. I feel like the state Department of Libraries really tried to work with individual libraries to help them deal with this as much as they could. And, you know, especially with a lot of the protests in the last year and everything happening in the wake of George Floyd, when people not only wanted to get together, but they wanted to organize, they wanted to learn things, they wanted to talk to other people about how they were feeling, or lately with registering for the vaccines, right? Those are things that can increase inequality if there aren't stops put in place to address that. And libraries are helping, but they're not quite as like vanguardist, we're going to get out in front of this more than anybody else. They're mostly partnering with other organizations who can use their help. I've seen a lot of librarians working as contact tracers. Capstone, our local community action group, has been huge about helping with people with vaccinations or people experiencing homelessness, frankly, who are really in a jam because in many cases you need access to the internet to figure out how you're going to find a place to live. And so some of that has been literally person to person, but with the librarians helping people make the connections to figure out how to work on solving those problems.
That was so helpful. And we have had a couple of comments, Jessamyn, just about things that you've said with access. James also said something that I actually put a star by next to in my notes, is that the idea of libraries sharing their Zoom accounts. That is such a helpful way to bring people into that space. Jennifer also adds that their librarian helps seniors to navigate the process of scheduling appointments, which is incredible. And so we're seeing a lot of people just, kind of uplifting what you have to say here and what you're doing. Jennifer also adds that the Peachum Library did a live coffee house series, which was excellent. I noticed that somebody else in the chat said something, and I thought this was great, that people, that online and ebook requests have been through the roof, and that people are using this opportunity to kind of binge watch favorite shows, favorite books, and that has been something that people have been able to do through the help of the library, which is incredible. I see right now, just in the questions, lots of kudos, lots of thanks. I personally just wanted to make a comment. It's not so much a question, but I was really struck by the number per capita of how many libraries we are blessed to have in Vermont, that it's approximately 183-ish, which per capita is more than any other state. That is something to really be so encouraged by and excited about. And I'm not a native Vermonter. I've been here for about 7 years, so hopefully people will consider me one soon. But one of the selling points that somebody told me is that Vermont's libraries are beautiful and incredible, and they're like little cathedrals is the word that somebody used. And honestly, I was kind of sold after that. So I'm so excited to see libraries lifted in this way and see the creative things that libraries have been doing. The story walk was a great idea. I wrote down so many ideas to reach out to my public library here in Hartford to see what I could do to support any of that were great. So I've just been looking in the chat, and it looks like things are winding down just a little bit. So if nobody else has another question, I think that this is a point where we can sign off. But Jessamyn, thank you so much for that incredibly interesting and enlightening and encouraging conversation that we've had today about the libraries. I think that what you shared today showed that we're all a little bit closer than we feel to one another, and that the libraries are being incredible and being responsive to that need for us to still communicate and still be in community and still, feed ourselves with this really wonderful knowledge across such a huge breadth. So again, thank you so much for being with us. Everybody that joined us live today, we are so appreciative. Thank you. And please reach out to us at Vermont Humanities. Again, my name is Rachel Edens, should you need anything or additional resources. But with that, I think we are ready to sign off.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everybody for showing up.